Hello, everyone, and welcome to another amazing episode here at Code Your English, the channel where we explore powerful ideas while helping you build real, confident English. I'm glad you're here. Really. And today, we're diving into a topic that's a little philosophical, a little personal, and definitely something many of us feel deep down, even if we don't always have the words to explain it. Have you ever learned something new? Maybe started a new job? Tried to understand a complex topic? Or even picked up a new hobby? And suddenly realized just how much you don't know? It's a strange feeling, isn't it? At first, you feel excited, motivated, but then, the more you learn, the more you start to see how much more there is to learn. And that can be, well, overwhelming, even a little scary. This feeling is so common that it's become a kind of quiet truth for people who love learning. The more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And surprisingly, that's not a bad thing. In fact, it's a sign that your thinking is expanding. It means you're growing, not just in knowledge, but in awareness. I remember when I first started learning how language actually works. I don't mean just speaking English or learning grammar rules. I mean really diving into how we communicate, how words carry meaning, how culture shapes the way we speak. At first, I thought, okay, this seems manageable. But the deeper I went, the more I realized how complex language is. Suddenly, I had more questions than answers. I started noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. And honestly, that made me feel small. Not in a bad way, but in a humbling way. And that's what today's episode is really about. We're going to talk about what happens when learning opens your eyes. Not just to new knowledge, but to everything you don't know yet. We'll look at why this can feel frustrating sometimes, why it can even trigger self-doubt or perfectionism, and most importantly, how to keep going when the path feels unclear. So, let me ask you something, and take a second to really think about it. Have you ever avoided doing something just because you were afraid of doing it wrong? Or maybe you didn't feel ready because you thought you needed to know everything first. If you have, you're definitely not alone. Stick around, because in this episode, we'll explore how to stay curious, how to shift your mindset, and how to become more comfortable with not knowing it all. Because the truth is, nobody does. And maybe, just maybe, that's what makes learning so powerful. Let's get into it. The illusion of certainty. Let's start with something we've all experienced. That feeling of being totally sure about something, only to discover later that we were completely wrong. Maybe it was something small, like thinking you knew the right lyrics to a song and confidently singing them, only to be corrected by someone else. Or maybe it was bigger, like thinking you understood how a system or process worked, but once you looked more closely, you realized you had only seen the surface. This happens more often than we think. And interestingly, the less we know about a subject, the more confident we often feel. Sounds strange, right? You'd think the more knowledge you have, the more confident you'd become. But actually, that's not always how it works. There's a famous idea in psychology that helps explain this. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Now don't worry, the name sounds complicated, but the idea is pretty simple. It describes a situation where people who know only a little about a topic often overestimate their understanding. In other words, when someone doesn't know much, they might think they know a lot. But as they learn more, they begin to see how complex the subject really is. Their confidence actually drops, not because they're getting worse, but because they're finally starting to realize how much more there is to learn. Let's take an example. Imagine someone starts learning English for the first time. After just a few weeks, they can say some simple sentences like, "My name is Anna," or "I like coffee." They feel good, and that's great. But maybe after 1 month they say, "English is easy." That might sound confident, but it's usually because they've only seen the beginner level. They haven't yet faced the tricky grammar rules, the idioms, the pronunciation, or the way people really speak in real life. But then something changes. That same person continues learning, and suddenly they notice things they didn't see before. Sentence patterns that don't follow the rules, words that sound different when people speak quickly, phrases that don't make literal sense, like break the ice or hit the books. Now they feel less sure. They start to think, wow, English is harder than I thought. And that's the Dunning-Kruger effect in action. At the beginning, when you know only a little, everything seems simple. But as your knowledge grows, you start to realize how much more there is to understand. Confidence goes down for a while. But here's the important part. Eventually, it comes back. As you keep learning and gaining experience, your confidence becomes real. It's based on depth, not just surface understanding. This kind of overconfidence happens in all areas of life, not just learning English. For example, maybe you've seen someone at work who just started a new job and immediately acts like they know everything. They speak with authority, give advice, and even correct others. But after a few months, they suddenly become quieter. Why? Because now they've seen more, made mistakes, and realized they didn't know as much as they thought. Or think about driving. Some people who just passed their driving test might feel invincible, like they can handle anything on the road. But once they actually start driving in real traffic, in different weather conditions, or in unfamiliar places, they begin to see how challenging it really is. Their confidence becomes more realistic. There's also social media, a place where many people share strong opinions about politics, health, education, or other complex issues. Sometimes people who have only read one article or watched one video suddenly feel like experts. But real experts, people who've studied these topics for years, often speak more carefully. They say things like, "It depends," or "We're still learning," because they know how much uncertainty there still is. So why do we fall into this illusion of certainty? Well, part of it is human nature. We like to feel sure of ourselves. It gives us a sense of control. And in some cases, confidence can be helpful. It gives us the courage to start something new. But if we stay in that place for too long, thinking we already know everything, we can stop growing. That's why awareness is so important. When you start to notice how much you don't know, it's not a reason to give up. It's actually a sign that you're moving forward. You're stepping out of the illusion and into a more honest relationship with learning. It can be uncomfortable, yes, but it's also the beginning of deeper understanding. So, here's a question to think about. Can you remember a time when you felt very confident about something, but later realized you didn't know as much as you thought? What was that moment like for you? And how did it change your perspective? The truth is, none of us knows everything. And that's okay. What matters most is not pretending to know it all, but staying open, curious, and willing to keep learning, even when it feels slow or uncertain. Because sometimes, realizing what you don't know is the most powerful step toward true understanding. Learning more and feeling smaller. Let's be honest. Most of us start learning something new with a mix of excitement and hope. There's a kind of energy at the beginning. You feel motivated, curious, maybe even a little proud of yourself for finally starting. And for a while, things go well. You make progress. You understand the basics. You feel like you're moving forward. But then, something shifts. You start to go deeper into the subject. And suddenly, you don't feel so confident anymore. The excitement is still there, yes, but now it's mixed with something else. Confusion, frustration, self-doubt. You start to realize, wow, this is way bigger than I thought. And that moment, that exact feeling, is what today's section is all about. I still remember this happening to me the first time I tried to learn how to edit audio for this podcast. At first, it seemed simple. Just record the voice, clean it up, maybe add some music. Done, right? But the more I looked into it, the more I realized how much I didn't understand. There were so many layers: sound quality, background noise, timing, volume balancing, EQ levels. I didn't even know what half of those words meant at first. At one point, I had spent hours editing just 5 minutes of audio, and it still didn't sound professional. I felt completely overwhelmed. It was a humbling experience. And that's an important word here: humbling. When something is humbling, it makes you realize you're not as skilled or experienced as you thought. It brings you back down to earth. It doesn't mean you're bad or stupid. Not at all. It just means you're seeing the truth more clearly. And seeing that truth, that you still have a long way to go, can honestly make you feel small. Almost like a beginner again. This happens in language learning all the time. For example, maybe you've been studying English for a while. You know the grammar. You've memorized hundreds of words. You've even passed some tests. But then you watch a movie or listen to a podcast in natural, fast English, and suddenly you feel lost. You catch maybe 60% of what's being said, or even less. You hear idioms you don't recognize. You notice the words are not pronounced the way they look in the dictionary. And just like that, your confidence drops. You might think, have I really learned anything at all? But of course, you have. You've learned enough to realize how much more there is to learn. And that's the key difference. That moment of realization is not failure. It's a turning point. The truth is, real learning doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it feels uncomfortable, even heavy. It's like opening a door and seeing not just one room, but an entire universe behind it. And at first, your brain says, wait, I didn't sign up for this. You feel overwhelmed, unsure where to even begin next. That's completely normal. And in fact, it's something almost every serious learner experiences. Think about someone learning to play guitar. In the beginning, they might learn a few chords, G, C, D, and play a basic song. It feels amazing. But later, they discover bar chords, fingerpicking, music theory, improvisation. The more they learn, the more they see just how deep the world of music really is. Suddenly, those first few songs feel like a drop in the ocean. It can be discouraging, but it can also be inspiring if you choose to see it that way. And that's the heart of this message. Feeling smaller doesn't mean you're shrinking. It means your perspective is growing. You're seeing more. You're understanding more. And with that new understanding comes new responsibility and new strength. So, if you've ever had a moment where you felt overwhelmed by how much you didn't know, I want you to know that doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It means you're doing something right. You're moving past the surface. You're engaging with complexity. And you're starting to build real, lasting knowledge. Let me ask you, can you remember a time when learning something made you feel lost or unsure, like you had taken a step forward, but then suddenly felt like you were 10 steps behind? How did you respond in that moment? Did you stop? Or did you keep going? Most people don't talk about this part of learning. They only show the progress, the results, the success. But real learners, people who stick with it, know that behind every skill is a long, sometimes messy journey. Feeling small isn't a reason to stop. It's actually a sign that you've stepped into something bigger than yourself. And if that's where you are right now, feeling lost, overwhelmed, maybe even a little humbled, let me say this clearly. Keep going. You're exactly where you need to be. Why this is a good sign. When you start learning something new, especially something challenging like a language or a skill, it's completely normal to feel uncomfortable at times. Maybe you feel confused, frustrated, or even a little lost. You might wonder if you're failing, or if you're just not good enough. But here's a very important idea I want you to keep in mind. That discomfort you feel is actually a very good sign. It means you're growing. Let me explain. Think about a plant. When a seed starts to grow, it pushes through the soil. At first, it's hard work, and the seed can feel like it's stuck in the dark, heavy dirt. But pushing through that dirt is exactly what helps the plant become strong. If the seed never faced that challenge, it wouldn't grow into a beautiful flower or tree. The same is true for us when we learn. When we feel stuck or uncomfortable, it's like the soil pushing against the seed. It's not a failure. It's a sign that something important is happening. You're growing. Your brain is stretching to understand new ideas, and your mindset is expanding. There's a very famous quote from the ancient Greek philosopher Socrates that helps us see this clearly. Socrates said, "I know that I know nothing." At first, this might sound negative or even strange. Why would someone say that they know nothing? But actually, this is one of the wisest things anyone has ever said about knowledge. What Socrates meant is this: true wisdom begins when you realize how much you don't know. Admitting that you don't have all the answers opens the door to learning more. It takes courage to say, "I don't know." But when you do, you give yourself permission to explore, to ask questions, and to grow. So if you ever feel like you're failing because you don't understand something quickly, or you make mistakes, stop for a moment and remind yourself, you're not failing, you're leveling up. This expression comes from video games. When a player faces a tough challenge or loses a life, it doesn't mean the game is over. It means they are leveling up, moving to a new stage with new skills and experiences. Learning is like that too. Every difficulty, every mistake, every moment of confusion is a step toward your next level. Sometimes, people think that learning should feel easy, that if they are smart, they should understand things right away. But that's not how real learning works. It's normal to hit bumps in the road. You might feel frustrated or tired, but these moments are the most important. They help you build strength, resilience, and deeper understanding. In fact, if you never feel challenged, it might mean you're not pushing yourself enough. Growth comes from stepping outside your comfort zone, trying things that seem difficult or new. That's where real progress happens. Think about how babies learn to walk. At first, they fall many times. They might get frustrated or scared, but each fall teaches them something. They get stronger, better at balance, and more confident. Eventually, they walk, run, and even dance. Without those falls, walking wouldn't happen. So, feeling small or unsure is part of the process. It means you're learning something meaningful. It means your brain is working hard to build new connections. And it means you're on your way to becoming more skilled and confident. Here's a question for you. Next time you feel stuck or confused, Can you try to see it as a sign that you're leveling up? What would change if you thought of difficulties as opportunities instead of problems? Remember, no one becomes an expert overnight. Every expert, every teacher, every successful person you admire has been through moments of doubt and challenge. The difference is, they kept going, even when it was hard. So, as you continue your journey with English, or anything else, hold on to this idea. Discomfort is a sign of growth. You are not failing. You are leveling up. And with that mindset, you'll find it easier to keep moving forward, even when the path seems unclear. You'll become more patient with yourself and more open to new possibilities. In the next part of this episode, we'll talk about one of the biggest challenges learners face, perfectionism, and how it can stop us from growing. But for now, take a moment to appreciate the fact that feeling uncomfortable means you're growing. It means you're alive, curious, and learning. And that is something to be proud of. The trap of perfectionism. As we continue exploring this idea that learning more can sometimes make us feel like we know less, there's another important challenge I want to talk about today. Perfectionism. Perfectionism is that voice inside your head that tells you everything has to be perfect before you start or before you feel proud of what you do. It's the fear of not knowing everything or of making mistakes that can actually hold you back from moving forward. Have you ever found yourself getting stuck in your own head, thinking too much about whether you're ready or good enough? Maybe you wanted to start speaking English more, but you worried about making grammar mistakes or sounding silly. Or maybe you wanted to try a new hobby, learn a new skill, or even apply for a job. But you hesitated because you felt like you didn't know enough yet. This is very common, and it's what people sometimes call analysis paralysis. It's when you spend so much time thinking, planning, and worrying that you never actually take action. You get caught in a loop of trying to be perfect before you even start. I want you to pause for a moment and ask yourself, what stops you from starting? Is it fear of making mistakes? Fear of looking foolish? Or maybe it's the belief that you need to know everything before you take the first step? Here's the tricky part. Perfectionism feels like it's protecting you. It's trying to stop you from failing or embarrassing yourself. But in reality, it can become your biggest obstacle. When you wait for everything to be perfect, you're actually stopping yourself from learning and growing. Think about learning English. If you only speak when you're 100% sure your grammar is perfect, you might never get a chance to practice with real people. But the truth is, making mistakes is one of the fastest ways to improve. Every mistake teaches you something new. Every conversation helps you get better. I remember when I was learning to speak another language, I was terrified of making mistakes. I kept rehearsing in my head, trying to say everything perfectly. But the more I waited, the more nervous I became. Eventually, I realized that waiting for perfection was just a way to avoid the risk of embarrassment. So, I forced myself to speak, even if I knew it wouldn't be perfect. And guess what? The more I spoke, the more confident I felt. This is why it's so important to challenge perfectionism. It's okay to be imperfect. It's okay to be a beginner. No one starts as an expert. The key is to keep moving, even when you don't have all the answers, or when things don't go exactly as planned. Let me ask you again. What stops you from starting something new? And if the answer is perfectionism or fear of failure, how can you remind yourself that action is better than waiting for perfect conditions? Here's a helpful way to think about it. Every expert was once a beginner. Nobody was born knowing everything. And every successful person has made mistakes. faced setbacks, and felt unsure. What made the difference was that they didn't get stuck in their own heads. They chose to try, to learn, and to keep going. So, if you feel stuck today, remember, you don't have to be perfect to start. You just have to be brave enough to take the first step. That's where real growth begins. From expert to beginner. Again and again. One of the most interesting things about learning is that it never really ends. No matter how much someone knows, there will always be moments when they feel like a beginner again. Even experts, teachers, doctors, artists, face this experience throughout their lives. Let me give you an example. Imagine a teacher who has been teaching English for 20 years. You might think that after so much experience, they know everything there is to know. But the reality is different. Every new group of students is different, with different needs, backgrounds, and learning styles. Sometimes, the teacher has to learn new teaching methods or technologies. Maybe there are new words or slang that didn't exist before. So, the teacher must keep learning, adapting, and sometimes feeling like a beginner all over again. The same happens with doctors. Medicine is a field that changes quickly. Every year, new research, treatments, and medicines appear. A doctor who wants to provide the best care needs to stay updated and be ready to learn new things. When a new disease appears or a new treatment becomes available, even the most experienced doctors have to study and adjust. This means they must be open to learning and sometimes start fresh with new knowledge. Artists also experience this. Think about a painter or a musician. Even if they have been creating art for years, they might want to try new styles or techniques. Maybe they take classes to learn a new instrument or experiment with different materials. Trying something new means becoming a beginner again. It's a way to grow and keep their creativity alive. This experience of going from expert to beginner isn't a failure. It's actually a normal and important part of learning. It teaches us that knowledge is not a fixed thing, it's a journey. Sometimes, you need to take a step back to move forward. In this process, a few key ideas become very important. One is mindset. A growth mindset means believing that your abilities and intelligence can develop with effort and time. People with this mindset don't see setbacks as reasons to stop. Instead, they see them as opportunities to learn and improve. Another important factor is consistency. Learning isn't about one big effort. It's about small, regular steps. Practicing a little every day, being patient, and staying curious help build skills over time. And finally, there's the idea of lifelong learning. Learning doesn't end when you finish school or reach a certain level. It's something you do your whole life. Every day offers a chance to discover something new, understand something better, or try a new skill. So, if you ever feel like you're starting from zero, or like you don't know enough, remember, even the experts go through this. Feeling like a beginner again is a natural part of growth. It means you're open to learning and improving. Think about your own learning journey. Have you ever experienced a moment when you thought you had mastered something, only to discover there was more to learn? Maybe it was when you moved to a new country, started a new job, or faced a challenge that required different skills. These moments can be tough, but they are also exciting. They remind us that learning is alive. It's not a finish line. It's a path full of surprises, challenges, and new opportunities. So keep a growth mindset. Be consistent, even if progress feels slow. And remember that every expert was once a beginner, and sometimes becomes a beginner again. That's the beauty of lifelong learning. Cultural messages about knowledge. Have you ever noticed that how people react to not knowing something can be very different depending on the culture they come from? In some places, not knowing an answer or making a mistake can feel like a big problem, something to be ashamed of. But in other cultures, not knowing is seen as a natural part of learning, even something to be curious about. Let's start by thinking about the first idea: shame. In many cultures, there is a strong message that you should already know certain things. If you don't, you might feel embarrassed or even afraid to admit that you don't know. This can make people quiet or avoid asking questions. They might pretend to understand, even when they don't. Have you ever felt that way? Like you couldn't ask for help because you didn't want others to think less of you? This feeling can stop us from learning. When we're afraid to admit we don't know something, we miss the chance to grow. It creates pressure to be perfect and can lead to stress or self-doubt. On the other hand, some cultures encourage curiosity. The idea that it's good to ask questions, explore new ideas, and accept that not knowing is part of being human. In these cultures, teachers might say, "It's okay to make mistakes. That's how we learn." People might feel comfortable saying, "I don't know, but I want to find out." This attitude helps people stay open-minded and willing to try new things. So, which message do you hear more often where you live? Is it shame around mistakes and not knowing, or is it curiosity and acceptance? Understanding these cultural messages can help you become more aware of how your own background affects your learning. It can also help you develop new habits and attitudes that support your growth. Now let's talk about some useful language that helps when we're not 100% sure about something. This is very helpful in English because it shows respect for other opinions and softens uncertainty. For example, you might say, "I might be wrong, but," or "I'm not sure, but I think." These phrases let you share your ideas while showing you're open to correction or discussion. They make conversations feel safer and more friendly. Another phrase is, "as far as I know," which means you believe something is true, but you're open to learning more. Using these softeners is a great way to practice English, especially when you're still building confidence. You could try using these expressions when speaking or writing, especially if you feel nervous about being wrong. They help you express ideas clearly while keeping the conversation open and relaxed. Let me ask you, when was the last time you admitted you didn't know something? How did it feel? Were you comfortable asking for help, or did you hesitate? Remember, everyone, even native speakers and experts, doesn't know everything. Admitting uncertainty is a sign of honesty and intelligence, not weakness. So, if you grew up in a culture that values certainty and perfection, it might take some practice to feel okay with not knowing, but that's perfectly normal. Becoming curious instead of ashamed about not knowing can be a powerful step in your learning journey. It opens the door to new ideas, new experiences, and new ways of thinking. And that curiosity, combined with kindness toward yourself, will help you become a more confident and successful learner. Shifting your mindset. One of the most powerful things you can do in your learning journey is to shift your mindset. What do I mean by that? Well, many of us start out thinking that we need to have all the answers right away. We want to understand everything perfectly before we move forward. But this way of thinking can be very limiting. Imagine if you thought you had to know everything before you could try something new. You would probably feel stuck, right? You might feel overwhelmed or even scared to make mistakes. And that's exactly what holds many people back. So, shifting your mindset means moving from needing all the answers to being okay with staying open and curious. It means accepting that learning is a process, sometimes slow, sometimes confusing. but always valuable. Let's talk about two phrases that are really helpful here: progress over perfection and growth mindset. Progress over perfection means that it's more important to make small improvements than to be perfect. You don't need to get everything right all the time. What matters is that you keep moving forward, even if it's just a little bit each day. Maybe you speak a few sentences in English, read a short article, or listen to a podcast like this one. Every small step is progress. The second phrase, growth mindset, was popularized by a psychologist named Carol Dweck. It means believing that your abilities, like your English skills, can grow with effort and practice. People with a growth mindset don't see mistakes as failures. Instead, they see them as chances to learn and improve. They understand that intelligence and skill are not fixed. They change and develop over time. Having a growth mindset helps you become more resilient. Resilience means being able to keep going, even when things are difficult. When you face setbacks, maybe you don't understand a grammar rule or you feel nervous speaking, resilience helps you bounce back instead of giving up. Along with resilience, it's important to have emotional flexibility. This means being able to manage your feelings in a healthy way. Sometimes learning can make you feel frustrated, tired, or discouraged. Emotional flexibility lets you notice these feelings without letting them control you. You can accept that it's okay to feel this way and then gently guide yourself to keep trying. A good way to practice emotional flexibility is to talk to yourself kindly. Instead of saying, "I'm terrible at this," try, "This is hard, but I'm working on it." When you change your inner voice like this, you create a better environment for learning and growth. Let me ask you, what would happen if you focused more on progress over perfection in your English learning? How would it feel to accept mistakes as part of your journey? Could you start to notice small improvements instead of waiting to be perfect? Remember, shifting your mindset doesn't happen overnight. It takes time and practice. But each time you choose to be curious instead of fearful, or to keep going instead of giving up, you build stronger habits and a healthier attitude toward learning. This mindset shift also opens you up to more joy in learning. When you're not stressed about being perfect, you can enjoy the process, the discoveries, the challenges, and the surprises. So, as you continue your journey, try to keep these phrases in mind: progress over perfection and growth mindset. Use them to remind yourself that learning is about moving forward step by step, with patience and kindness toward yourself. And if you ever feel stuck or discouraged, take a deep breath and ask yourself, "What can I learn from this moment?" That question helps turn challenges into opportunities. You are growing. You are learning. And that is what really matters. As we come to the end of today's episode, let's take a moment to look back on some of the important ideas we've talked about. First, we explored how sometimes, the more we learn, the more we realize there is so much we don't know. This can feel confusing or even overwhelming, but it's actually a sign of growth and curiosity. Remember the famous quote from Socrates, "I know that I know nothing." That idea shows us that true wisdom comes from being open to new knowledge, not from pretending we have all the answers. We also talked about the challenges of perfectionism, how waiting to be perfect before starting something new can keep us stuck. Instead, it's better to focus on progress, to take small steps, and to accept mistakes as part of the journey. This leads us to the idea of shifting our mindset, choosing a growth mindset, and valuing progress over perfection. When we do this, we become more resilient, able to keep going even when things get hard. We looked at how different cultures view knowledge and mistakes in different ways. Some see not knowing as shameful, while others encourage curiosity and learning from mistakes. Understanding this can help us become more patient and kind with ourselves and others. And we learned that even experts feel like beginners sometimes. Learning is a lifelong process, full of setbacks and new beginnings. The key is consistency and keeping a mindset open to growth. So, now I want to invite you to think deeply for a moment. What's something you've avoided because you didn't feel ready? Maybe it's speaking English with new people, trying a new skill, or even sharing your ideas with others. What stopped you from taking that step? Was it fear of making mistakes? Fear of not knowing enough? Whatever your answer is, remember this. Feeling not ready is normal, and it's okay. The important thing is to be kind to yourself and to find the courage to try anyway. Because every step you take, no matter how small, brings you closer to where you want to be. Learning isn't about being perfect or knowing everything. It's about being curious, open, and brave enough to explore the unknown. It's about embracing uncertainty and trusting yourself to grow. As you continue your learning journey, I hope you carry these ideas with you. Practice self-compassion, celebrate your progress, and remember that every expert was once a beginner. And sometimes they become beginners again. And that's a beautiful part of the adventure. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Code Your English. I'm really glad you joined me today. If you enjoyed this conversation, I hope you'll come back for future episodes where we will explore more interesting topics to help you improve your English and grow as a learner. Until then, take care of yourself, keep being curious, and keep coding your English step by step. See you next time.